November 12, 1942. The western desert stretches endlessly beneath a merciless sun. Sand clings to everything: metal, skin, breath itself. Near the twisted wreckage of a British supply convoy, something catches the eye of a German reconnaissance patrol. An American vehicle, abandoned but intact, sitting alone in the emptiness like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Its crew vanished when the position collapsed, fleeing into the desert heat. Standard procedure said destroy it or move on. But the commanding officer paused, staring at the boxy silhouette, and made a decision that would echo far beyond this moment. "Get me our best wrench turner," he said quietly. "I want to know what the hell this thing is." What happened in the next 30 minutes didn't arrive like thunder. It crept in slowly, settling over the mechanics like dust after an explosion. A realization that would challenge everything they'd been taught about German superiority. The placard on the dashboard read simple and plain: Willys MB. The Americans had a nickname for it. They called it a Jeep. The first shock came when they popped the hood. The engine bay looked almost surgical in its simplicity, designed not for perfection but for survival. Color-coded wires, labeled components you could read without squinting, parts you could reach without contorting your body, or hunting for specialty tools. The senior mechanic had spent 2 decades working on German military vehicles, machines built with the precision of Swiss watches. He'd never seen anything like this. Every bolt was the same size. Every component matched every other vehicle of its type exactly. This wasn't craftsmanship, this was something else entirely. A philosophy built around the idea that any farm boy with dirty hands and basic tools could keep this machine breathing. The Go Devil engine displaced just 134 cubic inches, cranking out 60 horsepower at 4,000 RPM. On paper, not impressive. German engines pushed more power, demanded more respect. But this engine wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was built to run, to survive, to be fixed by teenagers who'd never seen a wrench before boot camp. No specialty tools required, no factory-trained technicians needed, no engineering degree to change a spark plug. The Americans had designed this thing expecting farm boys and factory workers to keep it alive in the middle of nowhere, under fire, in conditions no engineer would ever approve. By November of 42, the gap between American and German vehicle philosophy had become a canyon. America was going to pump out over 640,000 of these Jeeps before the war ended. Germany would barely scrape together 50,000 Kübelwagens, their equivalent. But the numbers weren't even the worst part. What truly stung was what those numbers represented. The Jeep wasn't just a vehicle. It was a statement. Standardized, simplified, designed so that semi-skilled workers could assemble them by the thousands, using parts that clicked together like children's blocks. An officer approached as the mechanics continued their inspection, boots crunching on sand. "Well, can we use the damn thing?" The senior mechanic looked up, choosing his words like he was defusing a bomb. "This vehicle is remarkable," he said slowly. "Whoever designed this understood what it means to fight in the dirt." The officer's frown deepened. German engineering is the finest in the world. Everyone knows that. The mechanic didn't argue. He simply pointed to the transfer case, his finger tracing the single lever. "Look at this. One lever engages four-wheel drive, just one. Our Kübelwagens require multiple steps, and most of them don't even have four-wheel drive at all. The Kübelwagen was a good machine. No denying it. Ferdinand Porsche had poured his genius into it. Typical German attention to every detail. It was lighter than the Jeep, sipped less fuel, and its air-cooled engine meant no radiator to puncture when bullets started flying. But it had one fatal flaw that haunted every driver who'd ever gotten stuck: rear-wheel drive only. In the soft sand of North Africa, the mud-choked roads of Russia, the mountain passes of Italy, that limitation became a death sentence. The Jeep, on the other hand, could send power to all four wheels whenever you needed it. The system was so simple a soldier who couldn't read could master it in under 5 minutes. The mechanics kept digging deeper, peeling back layers of American thinking. The suspension used simple leaf springs, crude compared to the Kübelwagen's sophisticated torsion bars, but you could fix a leaf spring with a hammer and some wire in the field. The electrical system was basic, but built like a brick, designed to take punishment. The fuel system would run on anything that burned, no modifications needed. But the weight distribution troubled them most. The Jeep tipped the scales at around 2,450 pounds compared to the Kübelwagens lean, 1,540, a difference of over 900 pounds. German engineers would have called that excess weight a cardinal sin, reducing performance, guzzling fuel, violating every principle of efficiency. But the mechanics saw something else in that extra weight. They saw intention. That weight meant durability, over-engineered frames designed to absorb punishment that would crumple lighter vehicles like tin cans. The Americans had built this thing expecting soldiers to abuse it, overload it, drive it through hell itself, and they'd engineered it to come back asking for more. This wasn't the American incompetence that training films had promised. This was engineering that stared reality in the face and didn't blink. They brought the Jeep back to their forward position as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of copper and blood. Over the next 3 days, mechanics put it through tests that would have killed most vehicles. They drove it through sand so soft the Kübelwagens couldn't even attempt it. They loaded it past its rated capacity until the suspension groaned. They beat it, pushed it, dared it to fail. The Jeep swallowed everything. In terrain where rear-wheel drive vehicles required careful nursing and often died anyway, the Jeep just powered through like it was bored. The low-range gearing let it crawl over obstacles at walking speed, something the Kübelwagens gearing couldn't touch despite its reduction hubs. Word spread through the Afrika Korps like wildfire in dry grass. The Americans had built something that outperformed their best equivalent in almost every way that mattered. Officers and mechanics from other units started showing up to see it for themselves. The reactions followed a pattern you could set your watch by. Skepticism melting into grudging respect, then dawning horror as the implications settled in. A supply officer who'd worked in German automotive plants before the war spent an entire afternoon studying the vehicle, measuring, calculating, thinking. His assessment cut like a blade. This represents a fundamental difference in how we think, he told the assembled officers and NCOs. We build vehicles to achieve engineering perfection. The Americans build them to be manufactured, and in total war, that's the only thing that matters. He walked them through what that difference meant, pointing to the engine block. Look at this. It's cast, not machined to fine tolerances. The Americans sacrifice a tiny bit of performance for massive gains in production speed. They can train some kid who's never held a wrench to assemble one of these engines in a fraction of the time it takes to build ours. Now multiply that across every single component. His hands swept over the stamped metal body panels. These panels are crude compared to our vehicles, but they can produce them by the thousands in factories that were making refrigerators 6 months ago. The Americans have mobilized their entire economy, every washing machine plant, every commercial vehicle factory, every corner of their industrial base, all converted to military production. We cannot match this capacity. We can't even come close. The officers fell silent, the desert wind filling the space where their confidence used to be. He'd given voice to what many had started to suspect in the dark hours before dawn. Germany's focus on quality and precision made sense in peacetime. Hell, it made them rich. But in total war, the American approach of good enough products, delivered in overwhelming quantities, was proving devastatingly, brutally effective. One mechanic spent that evening by lamplight writing a detailed technical report, documenting every aspect of the Jeep's design, noting strengths and weaknesses with the thoroughness of a man who understood this mattered. The report climbed the chain of command, one of thousands pouring into Wehrmacht headquarters from every front. German mechanics and engineers were encountering American equipment everywhere now, and the assessments all sang the same dark song. The Americans were outproducing Germany by ratios that seemed mathematically impossible. In late 1942, Wehrmacht intelligence commissioned a study of Allied vehicle production, praying the numbers would prove the rumors wrong. The results confirmed their worst nightmares. American factories were completing military vehicles at a rate of thousands per day. Thousands. Every single day. Ford's Willow Run plant alone was finishing a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes at peak production, one complete four-engine heavy bomber every hour. American shipyards were launching Liberty ships faster than U-boats could sink them. The statistics painted a picture that made grown men feel small. America's 1942 military vehicle production exceeded the combined total of Germany, Italy, and Japan, and production was still accelerating. The captured Jeep became something of a celebrity in its unit. Soldiers competed for the chance to drive it. Officers used it for forward reconnaissance, trusting its reliability more than their own machines. When parts wore out, they scavenged replacements from other captured Jeeps with disturbing ease. Everything was interchangeable, every single part. By early 1943, the Afrika Korps had captured dozens of Jeeps scattered across the desert. Wehrmacht mechanics formed underground networks, sharing maintenance knowledge and trading scrounged parts like black market gold. A working Jeep could command prices far beyond its theoretical value, because everyone who'd driven one understood. This was better for desert warfare than anything Germany had built. Then came May 13th, 1943, the day the music stopped. The Afrika Korps surrendered in Tunisia. Approximately 250,000 German and Italian soldiers became prisoners, their war over, but their education in American manufacturing capacity just beginning. The contrast between German and American capabilities became impossible to ignore during the journey to captivity. American trucks transported prisoners in quantities that would have required horse-drawn wagons in the Wehrmacht. So many trucks the convoys stretched beyond sight. Liberty ships, typically built in 5 to 6 weeks at peak production compared to 8 months initially, carried thousands across the Atlantic. Every aspect of the operation demonstrated organizational capacity that made German logistics look primitive. At the prisoner processing center in Oran, Algeria, captured mechanics watched American motor pool sergeants service a fleet of vehicles with casual efficiency that would have been impossible in the Wehrmacht. The motor pool stretched like a metal forest. Dozens of jeeps, trucks, command cars. Young American soldiers, many barely old enough to shave, performed maintenance with speed and confidence that defied belief. Tools were abundant. Parts arrived without requisition delays. Every vehicle used the same basic components, so any mechanic could service anything without specialized knowledge. An American sergeant who spoke passable German noticed a captured mechanic watching. "You a mechanic?" The German nodded. "Afrika Korps? Vehicle maintenance." The sergeant grinned like they were old friends. "Well, no war for you now, but I bet you got questions. Come on, I'll show you around. Not like you can steal anything anymore." What followed was an afternoon that cracked open the world. The sergeant walked him through the motor pool, explaining American maintenance philosophy with the unguarded honesty of a man who knew the war was already won. "See, the thing is, we design everything so any farm boy can fix it," he said, wiping grease on his pants. "Most of our guys never saw a vehicle engine before basic training, so we make it simple. Color-coded wires, standard bolts, everything labeled. We got manuals written for 6th grade reading levels. The idea is if something breaks, anyone can fix it without calling in a specialist." The captured mechanic examined a disassembled Jeep engine laid out on a workbench. Every component was clearly marked. The maintenance manual contained detailed illustrations and step-by-step instructions that could guide someone with minimal mechanical knowledge through repairs that would require an expert in the Wehrmacht. "How many of these do you produce?" The sergeant shrugged like the question was meaningless. "Hell, I don't know exact numbers, but thousands every week I'd guess. They keep coming off the production lines faster than we can ship them out. We got so many Jeeps that if one breaks down, we usually just grab another instead of fixing it immediately. Thousands every week." The numbers seemed like a fever dream, yet the evidence surrounded them. This motor pool contained more vehicles than entire German divisions had possessed. And this was just one small American unit at a forward supply base, a drop in an ocean of American steel. The sergeant continued the tour, showing him Dodge trucks capable of hauling loads that would require two German vehicles. Half-track personnel carriers produced in quantities that made German equivalents seem like myths. Tank transporters that could move armor without wearing out tracks. "The thing is, we learned from the last war," the sergeant said. "We build everything with common components. A bolt from a Jeep fits a truck, fits a half-track. Same with electrical parts, hydraulic systems, everything. Makes logistics simple. Instead of needing 1,000 different parts, we need maybe a couple hundred, and we produce them by the millions." This was the secret German manufacturing had never grasped. Component commonality wasn't just about production efficiency. It was about creating an ecosystem where any part worked anywhere. Any mechanic could service anything, and the entire system reinforced itself like living tissue. The journey from North Africa to American prison camps continued the education with relentless precision. At every stop, prisoners witnessed American production capacity operating at a scale that rewrote their understanding of what was possible. The port at Norfolk, Virginia processed thousands of tons of supplies daily with mechanical efficiency. Cranes loaded and unloaded cargo at speeds that would have required armies of workers in Hamburg. Trains carried prisoners across America in passenger coaches that would have been luxury in Germany. And everywhere were vehicles. Cars filled parking lots outside factories like schools of fish. Trucks lined highways in convoys that stretched beyond the horizon. Military vehicles sat in depot yards by the thousands, awaiting shipment to combat zones, waiting like patient steel soldiers. At Camp Hearne, Texas, skilled mechanics volunteered for the motor pool. American camp commanders welcomed their expertise because the war effort demanded every available worker. For the next 2 years, German mechanics worked alongside American soldiers, maintaining the vehicles that kept the camp running, learning lessons that would reshape their understanding of engineering itself. American mechanics approached vehicle maintenance with direct, almost brutal practicality. They weren't engineers striving for perfection. They were problem solvers focused on keeping equipment operational, period. When something broke, they fixed it fast with whatever was available. When parts weren't available, they improvised with creativity that bordered on art. When a vehicle proved unrepairable, they cannibalized it for components and requested a replacement, which arrived within days rather than the weeks German logistics required. The captured mechanics observed American techniques with the intensity of students who understood their lives depended on this knowledge. German mechanics were trained to maintain vehicles to factory specifications, requiring specialized tools and proper procedures that took years to master. American mechanics were trained to keep things running by any means necessary, and they could train a replacement in weeks. In peacetime conditions, German methods produced better results. But in wartime chaos, American methods proved vastly, overwhelmingly more effective. The motor pool at Camp Hearne processed hundreds of vehicles monthly, a river of steel flowing through maintenance bays. Jeeps came in for routine service, received attention in hours rather than days, and returned to duty. The efficiency came from parts abundance and component interchangeability that seemed almost magical. When a part needed replacement, the parts room had dozens in stock. When a tool was required, the tool room provided it immediately. When a vehicle was beyond repair, another took its place before the paperwork was finished. One German mechanic befriended an American soldier who'd worked for Ford before the war, a friendship built on shared language of engines and grease. The American proved knowledgeable about the automotive sector in ways that revealed the machinery behind the miracle. "Before the war, I worked the assembly line at Willow Run," he said one evening, sitting on the bumper of a truck. "That's Ford's bomber plant outside Detroit, biggest factory in the world. We're building B-24 Liberators. Started production in '42, and by the time I got drafted last year, we were completing one bomber every hour, every single hour. A complete 4-engine heavy bomber rolled off that line. The arithmetic staggered the mind, made reality feel unreal. 24 bombers per day, over 700 per month. How could such production be possible? Mass production principles, the American explained, like he was discussing the weather. Mr. Ford figured out how to break down complex manufacturing into simple, repeatable steps. You don't need skilled craftsmen if every worker does one simple task repeatedly. A kid fresh off the farm can be trained in a week to install one type of bolt in one location. Do that with 1,000 workers and you get massive output. It's not magic, it's mathematics. This was the fundamental difference that separated victory from defeat. German production relied on skilled craftsmen building quality products in moderate quantities, the way things had been built for centuries. American production relied on semi-skilled workers building adequate products in quantities that defied comprehension, a revolution in manufacturing that rewrote the rules of war. The American continued, warming to his subject. Same thing with Jeeps. Willys Overland makes them, so does Ford. Both plants use identical specifications. Apart from a Willys Jeep fits a Ford Jeep perfectly, they're completely interchangeable. That means if one plant gets bombed or has problems, the other keeps producing. Maintenance is simple because every mechanic learns one vehicle, not dozens of variants. The German mechanic thought about the Wehrmacht's vehicle inventory, a nightmare of incompatibility. Dozens of different truck types from different manufacturers, each with unique parts and maintenance requirements. Kübelwagens from Volkswagen, command cars from various sources, captured vehicles from across Europe, each requiring its own spare parts and specialized knowledge. German logistics were a labyrinth of incompatible systems held together by desperation and skill. American logistics were streamlined through uniformity into a machine that ran itself. The real genius is that we designed for manufacturability from the start, the Americans said. When they put out requirements for the Jeep back in 1940, they gave companies just 75 days to produce a prototype. American Bantam did it in 49 days. Then Willys and Ford refined the design for mass production. Everything had to be simple to manufacture, simple to maintain, simple to repair. Simplicity was the entire philosophy. The captured mechanics had examined enough Jeeps to recognize this truth in their bones. The vehicle wasn't elegant. German engineers would have designed something more sophisticated, more refined, more perfect. But sophistication impeded mass production, and mass production was winning the war with the inexorable logic of mathematics and steel. By summer of 1944, prisoners had heard rumors of Operation Overlord, whispers of the Allied invasion of Normandy. When news arrived of the landing's success, many felt no surprise, just a hollow confirmation of what they already knew. The Allies had the manufacturing capacity to build an invasion fleet that would have taken Germany years to assemble, and they'd done it in months. News filtered into the camps through American newspapers and radio broadcasts, painting pictures of the Normandy beaches where Allied forces had landed, with thousands of vehicles in the first wave alone. Jeeps, trucks, tanks, amphibious vehicles, all carried across the English Channel in purpose-built landing craft themselves, manufactured by the thousands. The scale of the operation defied human comprehension, rewrote the boundaries of what seemed possible. 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave, and within weeks, millions of Allied soldiers would be fighting in Europe, all supplied by a production base that created equipment faster than the Wehrmacht could destroy it. A hydra that grew 2 heads for everyone cut off. German prisoners reflected on their pre-war confidence in victory. That certainty that had felt so solid, so unshakable. That confidence had been based on assumptions about German technological superiority, assumptions that now seemed almost childlike in their naivety. Those assumptions proved catastrophically incomplete. Germany had superior engineering in many areas. No one could deny it. German tanks were more heavily armored and better armed than most American equivalents. German aircraft were often more sophisticated. Germans' small arms were excellent. But none of that mattered. None of it when America could produce 5 tanks for every one Germany built, 10 trucks for every German truck, 100 Jeeps for every Kübelwagen. In the motor pool one afternoon, prisoners watched American soldiers loading Jeeps onto transport trucks for shipment to the port, a scene repeated across America every day. A young private drove each jeep up the loading ramps with casual confidence, dozens of vehicles loaded in less than an hour, all bound for Europe to replace losses and supply new units. One German mechanic realized with sick clarity that this single loading operation at one camp in Texas represented more vehicles than his entire division had possessed in North Africa. This scene was being repeated at camps and depots across America every single day, an endless river of steel flowing toward Europe. The mathematics became inescapable, undeniable, crushing. Germany had mobilized its economy for total war, stripping civilian production to support military manufacturing, sacrificing everything on the altar of victory. Yet, German military vehicle production in 1943 totaled less than 100,000 units of all types. America, maintaining a thriving civilian economy, produced over 2 million military vehicles the same year, while Americans at home still bought cars and lived normal lives. The disparity wasn't just quantitative, it was qualitative, a difference in kind, not just degree. American vehicles were designed for wartime realities: ease of maintenance, interchangeable parts, simple operation, rugged reliability. German vehicles were engineered to specifications that made sense in peacetime, but proved impractical in sustained combat. Beautiful machines that demanded more than war could provide. In November 1944, news reached the camp of a German offensive in the Ardennes, what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last desperate gamble in the West. The offensive relied heavily on capturing American fuel supplies because Germany no longer had sufficient fuel to sustain armored operations, reduced to feeding off the enemy like a parasite. More troubling were reports of Operation Greif, Otto Skorzeny's commando operation using captured American equipment. German soldiers had been outfitted with captured jeeps, American uniforms, fake identification, tasked with infiltrating Allied lines to cause confusion and capture bridges. If even Skorzeny, Hitler's favorite commando who had rescued Mussolini from imprisonment, was reduced to depending on captured American vehicles because German vehicles were insufficient, that revealed everything about the Wehrmacht's material situation, the final admission of industrial defeat. The operation failed quickly. American military police identified the German infiltrators through careful questioning about American culture and procedures, questions no German could answer convincingly. The Ardennes offensive itself ground to a halt, not primarily from American resistance, though that was fierce and costly, but because German forces ran out of fuel. Panzer divisions abandoned their tanks when fuel trucks failed to arrive. Steel beasts left silent in the snow. Infantry divisions resorted to horse-drawn transport because motorized logistics had collapsed completely. By January 1945, the German attack had been contained and reversed. Another defeat, another step toward the end. Spring of 1945 brought news of Germany's collapse with the inevitability of falling dominoes. The Red Army closed on Berlin from the east, grinding forward through rivers of blood. American and British forces crossed the Rhine and drove deep into Germany from the west, unstoppable now. In the Camp Motor Pool, German mechanics continued their work, maintaining vehicles for an army that had defeated their homeland. They felt no satisfaction in their work, but no shame either, just a hollowness where pride used to live. Germany had lost, not because its soldiers lacked courage or skill. Anyone who'd seen the Afrika Korps fight knew better, but because it had challenged powers whose production capacity it could never hope to match. One afternoon in April, an American soldier approached with news delivered matter-of-factly. Germany surrendered. War's over in Europe. The mechanics nodded. They had expected this for months, felt it coming like distant thunder. What happens to us now? You'll go home eventually, the soldier said. Probably not immediately. Lots of logistics to work out. But you'll go home. One mechanic considered home. Home to a Germany that had been bombed into rubble, occupied by foreign armies. Its cities destroyed by the same manufacturing might that had produced the Jeep he'd examined years ago in the desert. The circle complete, the American asked, tone curious rather than accusatory. "You're a smart guy. Did you really think Germany could win?" The mechanic thought carefully about his answer, weighing words like a jeweler weighing gold. Before the war, yes, we believed German quality would overcome American quantity. We had seen American products before the war, and many were inferior to German equivalents, mass-produced junk. We assumed American military equipment would be the same, cheap and poorly made. But it wasn't, he said quietly. No. When we examined that first Jeep in '42, we realized we had made a fundamental error. We had confused peacetime quality with wartime effectiveness. Your Jeep wasn't better engineered than our Kübelwagen in absolute terms. It was better designed for mass production and field conditions, and in total war, that proved decisive. That was everything. The American nodded, understanding passing between them. Yeah, we build adequate products quickly and in huge quantities. That's the American way. Exactly, the German said. They stood in silence for a moment, two mechanics from opposing sides, united by shared understanding of what had actually determined the war's outcome. The truth that neither propaganda nor training had prepared them for. The repatriation process began in late 1945, a slow unwinding of captivity. German prisoners boarded ships for the journey home, sailing back across an ocean that had swallowed so many. One mechanic arrived in Bremen in January 1946, processing through Allied control stations, before being released into a Germany he barely recognized. The city was ruins, rubble stretched in every direction, like a landscape of broken teeth. But amid the destruction, he noticed something with bitter irony. American vehicles everywhere. Jeeps carrying Allied officers through the shattered streets, trucks delivering relief supplies, motor pools where German civilians worked alongside Allied soldiers. The conquerors and conquered united by the language of engines and maintenance. He approached one motor pool, introducing himself to the American captain in command. His English, learned during years of captivity, was serviceable now, another skill born of defeat. Sir, I am a former Oberfeldwebel of the Afrika Korps, recently repatriated from Camp Hearne, Texas. I am a trained vehicle mechanic with experience maintaining American equipment. Are you hiring civilian workers? The captain examined his identification papers, expression neutral. Says here you worked in our motor pool in Texas, that right? Yes, sir, 2 years. The captain made a note. Decision already made. We need mechanics desperately. Most German mechanics either died in the war or are still in POW camps. You can start tomorrow. Pay is an occupation script, redeemable for rations and necessities. And so the former Afrika Korps mechanic found himself employed by the army he had fought against, maintaining the same vehicles he had once examined as enemy equipment. The wheel turned full circle. The Allies needed mechanics. He needed work. The war was over. Life continued with the brutal practicality that survival demands. Over the following months, he witnessed the beginning of Germany's reconstruction, watched it rise from ashes. American aid poured in, distributed with the same efficiency that had won the war. Food, medicine, construction materials, all arrived in American trucks coordinated by American planners who approached Germany's rebuilding with the systematic thinking that had characterized their warfare. He worked in the motor pool, training young Germans in American maintenance techniques, passing on knowledge bought with blood and defeat. Many of his students were former Wehrmacht soldiers like himself, men who needed civilian skills in a Germany that would no longer have a military, warriors learning to build instead of destroy. He taught them what he had observed, what years of working with American equipment had burned into his understanding: simplicity over sophistication, functionality over perfection, results over theory. These were lessons learned from American vehicles, applicable now to rebuilding German manufacturing, applicable to building a future from the ruins of the past. By 1947, he had been promoted to supervisor of the motor pool's German civilian staff, a small victory in a world of defeats. The American captain who commanded the facility treated him with respect, valuing his experience and organizational skills, seeing the man rather than the former enemy. One evening, the captain invited him to share a drink in his office, bourbon that burned pleasantly. "I've been thinking about something," the captain said. You've worked with both German and American vehicles extensively. If you were designing a vehicle for the new Germany, what would it look like? He considered carefully, knowing the question mattered more than it seemed. I would adapt the American approach for European conditions, he said finally. Smaller than a Jeep, more fuel efficient, but maintaining the same philosophy. Common parts, simple maintenance, designed for manufacturing rather than engineering awards. Europe has narrow roads and limited fuel, but we need the reliability of American design thinking, the lessons you taught us. The captain nodded satisfied. That's smart thinking. Marshall Plan money will rebuild German manufacturing, and German engineers are already studying American methods. The future is American-style mass production, adapted for local conditions. The best of both worlds. This proved prophetic, a prediction that became reality. In the decades that followed, West German manufacturing adopted American production philosophy while maintaining German attention to quality, creating a synthesis that was stronger than either approach alone. The result was an economic renaissance that transformed Germany from a devastated nation into an industrial powerhouse, a miracle built on lessons learned in defeat. Companies like Volkswagen, which had produced the Kübelwagen during the war, evolved into global automotive giants by combining German engineering precision with American mass production techniques, marrying old-world craftsmanship with new-world efficiency. The Volkswagen Beetle, which became one of history's best-selling automobiles, embodied this synthesis perfectly. Simple, reliable, manufacturable in huge quantities, affordable for average families, everything the Jeep had taught them translated into peacetime success. Former Wehrmacht mechanics, who had worked in American prison camp motor pools, returned to Germany with knowledge that proved invaluable, seeds of understanding planted in captivity now bearing fruit. They understood component standardization, had witnessed efficient parts, distribution systems, had seen how simplified maintenance procedures increased vehicle availability, had observed how designing for manufacturability rather than perfection enabled mass production. These insights, gained through years of maintaining American equipment, influenced German automotive design for decades, shaped an industry, rebuilt a nation. The German manufacturers that emerged from the ruins didn't try to recreate pre-war approaches, didn't attempt to resurrect the old ways. Instead, they synthesized German precision with American production efficiency, created something new from the marriage of two philosophies. By the early 1950s, this hybrid approach was producing results that astonished the world. Volkswagen production ramped up from thousands of vehicles annually to hundreds of thousands, an explosion of manufacturing capacity. Mercedes-Benz adapted assembly line techniques while maintaining quality standards that became legendary. BMW restructured its manufacturing to emphasize component commonality across model lines, learned the lessons well. The economic miracle of the 1950s and 1960s owed much to these changes, built on a foundation of defeat and education. West Germany became an export powerhouse, selling vehicles globally that combined reliability with affordability, German quality at American prices. The synthesis of German and American approaches created products that neither nation's pre-war philosophy could have produced alone. Proof that wisdom could emerge from catastrophe. U.S. Army historian Hugh M. Cole, who interviewed Wehrmacht generals after their surrender, documented their perspective with academic precision. Cole reported that German military leaders admired the Jeep more than anything else in the formidable American arsenal. Not the B-17 bombers that turned German cities to ash, not the Sherman tanks that rolled across Europe, not the artillery that shattered divisions. The simple Jeep, because it represented the manufacturing philosophy that had actually won the war. The truth behind the thunder. General George C. Marshall himself called the Jeep America's greatest contribution to modern warfare. Words that weren't hyperbole, but cold assessment. The Jeep embodied principles that transformed not just military logistics, but post-war global manufacturing. Standardization, simplification, design for production, emphasis on reliability over sophistication, functionality over elegance. By November 1943, The US Army had enough data on captured Kübelwagens to publish Technical Manual TME 9803, a complete guide to operating and maintaining German vehicles. The manual was published on June 6, 1944, D-Day itself, enabling American forces landing in France to utilize any Kübelwagen they captured, turning German vehicles against Germany. The Wehrmacht never published an equivalent manual for the Jeep, despite capturing thousands. They didn't need to. The Jeep was intuitive enough that any mechanic could figure it out within an hour. This contrast illustrated the fundamental difference in design philosophy better than any report could. The Kübelwagen required a detailed manual translated into English for American mechanics to understand its sophisticated systems, complex engineering demanding complex explanation. The Jeep required no manual at all for German mechanics to operate and maintain it effectively. Simplicity speaking a universal language. The reunions began in the 1960s, gatherings of ghosts. Former members of the Afrika Corps, who had been captured in Tunisia, gathered to remember fallen comrades, to speak names that deserved remembering. At one such gathering in 1967, an impromptu discussion arose about the vehicles of the war. Old men comparing notes on machines they'd known better than lovers. One former mechanic offered his perspective, words chosen carefully. The Kübelwagen was better engineered in many respects, lighter, more fuel-efficient, excellent for desert conditions where its air-cooled engine gave real advantages. But the Jeep was better designed for modern war. Four-wheel drive, simpler maintenance, common parts, and most importantly, producible in quantities we could never match. That was the killing blow. An old officer who had commanded a reconnaissance unit nodded, memory flickering in his eyes. I remember capturing my first Jeep in '41. We thought it was crude compared to our vehicles. Took us months to realize that simplicity was actually elegant efficiency by '43. Every unit wanted captured Jeeps because they worked better under combat conditions. We preferred the enemy's vehicles to our own. Another veteran added, voice heavy with old understanding. The worst moment for me was realizing that America was producing more Jeeps in a week than Germany produced Kübelwagens in a year. That's when I knew we would lose. Not from any particular battle, but from simple mathematics. They could replace losses faster than we could inflict them. We were fighting arithmetic. This was the consensus that emerged from such discussions. The truth that old soldiers could finally speak. German soldiers had tremendous respect for the Kübelwagen as a vehicle, loved it even. But they recognized that the Jeep and what it represented about American production capacity had been decisive, not through combat effectiveness alone, though it was effective enough, through what it revealed about the disparity in manufacturing capability between the combatants. The gap that could never be bridged by courage or skill. The Wehrmacht's logistical situation had been dire throughout the war, a hemorrhage that never stopped. By 1943, approximately 80% of German divisions relied on horse-drawn transport, animals pulling carts like medieval armies. The German army entered World War II with 514,000 horses and would eventually employ 2.75 million horses and mules during the war. With approximately 1.1 million horses in service at any given time, and over 2 million of these animals died during the conflict. Frozen in Russia, shot in France, starved everywhere. In contrast, American divisions were completely motorized, every single one. Every American unit relied on trucks, not horses, for logistics, a difference that created operational advantages Wehrmacht commanders could only dream about. American supply columns could move hundreds of kilometers in a day, rolling forward like clockwork. German supply columns, limited by the walking speed of horses, averaged perhaps 30 kilometers daily in good conditions, crawling forward while the enemy sprinted. When Wehrmacht generals examined the reasons for their defeat, sitting in quiet rooms after the guns fell silent, they consistently pointed to material disparity rather than tactical or strategic failures. German soldiers fought with skill and courage that deserved songs. German officers made reasonable tactical decisions, often brilliant ones, But German industry couldn't produce enough equipment to sustain operations against enemies with overwhelming material superiority. Couldn't feed the beast that total war demanded. The Jeep became the symbol of this disparity because every German soldier who encountered one understood instantly what it represented. Here was a vehicle so abundant that Americans treated it as disposable, so reliable that it required minimal maintenance, so simple that any soldier could operate and repair it, so effective that German units preferentially used captured Jeeps over their own vehicles whenever possible, choosing the enemy's machine over their own. In 1976, the United States Army began replacing the Jeep with the HMMWV, the Humvee that would define a new generation. The Jeep had served for 35 years, an extraordinary lifespan for any military vehicle, a testament to design that worked. Many remained in service with reserve units and allied militaries for decades more. Still running, still working, still proving the philosophy that built them. That same year, Volkswagen celebrated the 1 millionth VW Golf produced, another milestone in the synthesis. The Golf, like the Beetle before it, embodied lessons from both German and American approaches. Precision engineering combined with mass production efficiency, the marriage that had rebuilt Germany. The wisdom born from defeat. By the 1980s, West Germany had become one of the world's leading economies, risen from ashes to prosperity. German automotive companies exported millions of vehicles annually, stamped Made in Germany, with pride restored. German manufacturing was synonymous with quality and reliability. But that quality was now paired with efficient production methods owing much to American influence. The lessons learned in prison camp motor pools, now the foundation of success. The final Afrika Korps reunion took place in 1998, a gathering of survivors. Fewer than 24 veterans attended, all in their 70s or 80s, old men who had been young soldiers in a war that felt like another lifetime, survivors of a conflict that had ended more than half a century earlier, ghosts of desert battles. During the reunion, someone mentioned that a local museum had acquired a restored Willys MB Jeep, and most wanted to visit, drawn by memory and something deeper. They stood around the vehicle, these elderly men who had once been warriors in Africa, examining it with the eyes of mechanics who had come to respect it, who understood what it meant. One veteran reached out to touch the hood, his arthritic fingers tracing the familiar lines like reading Braille. "I captured one of these in '42, he said quietly. "Used it for 3 months before I got wounded at El Alamein. Best vehicle I ever drove. Better than anything we had. Better than anything." Another nodded slowly, memory washing over him. "I examined one in Tunisia just before we surrendered. Couldn't believe how simple the design was. Realized then that we'd been approaching vehicle design all wrong. Too complicated, too difficult to produce and maintain. We'd been building art when we needed tools. They made over 600,000 of them," a third veteran added, the number still staggering after all these years. "We made 50,000 Kübelwagens. That ratio told you everything, the whole story in 2 numbers. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of history settling over them. The Jeep sat before them, a museum piece now, its war long over, its battles fought and finished. But for these veterans, it represented something more than a historical artifact, something that transcended metal and engineering. It was a symbol of the production capacity that had defeated them, the functional engineering that had proven effective, the abundance that had overwhelmed scarcity, the future that had crushed the past. "We never had vehicles like this," one finally said, voice barely above a whisper. "Not in the numbers. Not with the reliability. Not designed with the same philosophy. We built for perfection. They built for production, and production won." This was the lesson that Wehrmacht mechanics had absorbed, examining captured Jeeps in the deserts of North Africa, in the mountains of Italy, in the fields of France, a lesson written in steel and sweat. It was a lesson that shaped post-war Germany and influenced global manufacturing for generations, ripples spreading from that first examination in the desert. The Jeep had been more than a vehicle, more than a tool of war. It had been an education, a teacher that spoke in the language of function and mass production. Wehrmacht mechanics, humbled by defeat, had proven to be excellent students, learning lessons that pride would never have taught them. They studied not just how to maintain American equipment, but why that equipment had been designed as it was, and what those design choices revealed about the manufacturing philosophy that had won the war. The thinking behind the metal. That knowledge, painful in its acquisition, bought with blood and defeat, became the foundation for Germany's reconstruction and eventual prosperity. The defeat taught humility, stripped away arrogance and illusion. American equipment taught functional engineering, showed them a different way. The combination produced a new German philosophy that served the nation far better than pre-war hubris, built something stronger from the ruins. The story of Wehrmacht mechanics and the Jeep is a story of learning through defeat, of wisdom emerging from catastrophe. Pride had told them that German engineering was superior, that quality would triumph over quantity, that sophistication would overcome simplicity, that they were destined to win. Reality taught them otherwise, taught them hard lessons written in sand and blood. American vehicles were not better engineered than German equivalents in most technical specifications, not more elegant or refined. But they were better designed for modern warfare's realities, producible in massive quantities, maintainable by minimally trained personnel, built with common interchangeable parts, reliable under abuse that would kill lesser machines. This functionality, multiplied by American manufacturing capacity, created overwhelming material superiority that no amount of German skill or courage could overcome. Mathematics more powerful than bravery. The Wehrmacht had excellent soldiers, some of the finest who ever marched. It had capable officers who understood their craft. It had sophisticated equipment that embodied engineering excellence. But it lacked the foundation necessary to sustain total war against enemies who could produce equipment faster than Germany could destroy it, who could replace losses overnight, who fought with the power of industrial capacity. The mechanics who maintained both German and American vehicles understood this through direct experience, through hands-on knowledge that transcended theory. They had seen both systems operate under combat conditions. They had worked with vehicles designed according to different philosophies, lived with both approaches. They knew which approach worked better under combat conditions, which philosophy won when reality did the judging. That knowledge informed their work rebuilding Germany, shaped the future they built from ruins. When they trained young mechanics, they emphasized lessons learned the hard way, paid for with defeat. When they consulted on manufacturing processes, they advocated for standardization and simplification. American thinking with German precision. When they designed new products, they prioritized manufacturability and reliability over engineering perfection, function over elegance. The engineers who rebuilt German automotive and machinery sectors had studied, captured American equipment in the desert, worked in prison camp motor pools maintaining jeeps and trucks, observed American manufacturing methods with the attention of men who understood this knowledge was treasure. They created a hybrid that was stronger than either parent, German precision combined with American production efficiency. The best of two worlds. That hybrid proved extraordinarily successful beyond anyone's predictions. By the 1970s, West Germany had become a leading exporter of manufactured goods, competing globally with quality and efficiency. The economic success validated lessons learned through defeat, proved that wisdom could emerge from catastrophe. Germany had abandoned the hubris that contributed to catastrophe and adopted a more effective approach, informed by careful study of the victor's methods, learning from those who had beaten them. The Jeep played a meaningful role in that transformation, not through any single dramatic moment, but through direct experience multiplied across thousands of soldiers. Every Wehrmacht mechanic who maintained a captured Jeep absorbed insights about American philosophy, learned by doing. Every officer who rode in a captured Jeep recognized its advantages, felt them through the seat of his pants. Every soldier who witnessed the abundance of Allied vehicles understood what propaganda had tried to conceal, saw the truth with his own eyes. These experiences, shared by hundreds of thousands of German soldiers and prisoners, created widespread understanding that Germany's defeat was not primarily military but material, not about courage but capacity. This understanding shaped attitudes toward reconstruction in profound ways. German leaders and engineers looked to adapt American methods rather than restore pre-war practices that had proven inadequate, learned from defeat. They embraced mass manufacturing rather than emphasizing small-scale craft production that couldn't compete. They designed for manufacturability and reliability rather than perfection, regardless of production difficulty, practicality over elegance. The Wehrmacht mechanics, who first encountered jeeps in North African deserts, could not have imagined the long-term influence of that encounter, couldn't have known they were witnessing a revolution. They were trying to understand an enemy vehicle, assess its capabilities, determine whether it could be used by their own forces, simple practical questions. In doing so, they discovered truths about manufacturing capacity and engineering philosophy that would shape the rest of their lives and influence their nation's reconstruction. Lessons that built a future. The last of those mechanics have passed away now, their voices silenced by time. Their direct testimony is lost, faded like photographs left in the sun. But the lessons they learned remain embedded in manufacturing practices worldwide, living on in every vehicle, every product, every system designed with their principles. Every vehicle designed for ease of manufacture owes something to the philosophy the Jeep embodied, carries its DNA. Every standardized part reflects American influence on global manufacturing standards, speaks that language. Every emphasis on reliability over sophistication echoes lessons learned in motor pools where Wehrmacht mechanics maintained captured American equipment. Wisdom bought with defeat. This is the Jeep's legacy, beyond battlefields and victories, beyond the war itself. A teacher of principles that transformed manufacturing worldwide, that changed how humanity builds things. It taught that assumptions about superiority need constant examination, that certainty can be the most dangerous illusion, that functional effectiveness matters more than sophisticated design, that what works beats what impresses, that designing for manufacture and maintenance serves better than designing for perfection, that practical beauty has its own elegance. Those lessons helped transform Germany from defeated enemy to prosperous ally, from ruins to renaissance. The mechanics who admitted with painful honesty that they had never had vehicles like the Jeep became architects of renewal, builders of a new Germany. Their humility, born from defeat and educated through observation, served Germany better than the pride that preceded catastrophe, built something stronger and more lasting. In November 1942, examining a captured Jeep in the North African desert under a brutal sun, Wehrmacht mechanics began a journey of discovery that would influence a generation and reshape a nation. The mechanics who drove captured Jeeps, who maintained them, who came to understand them, admitted something that took courage. They had never had vehicles like it, never built anything quite so effective for the realities of war. That admission, painful as it was, marked the beginning of wisdom that rebuilt a nation from ashes, that turned defeat into the foundation of future success. The desert wind still blows across North Africa, shifting sand over the battlefields where these lessons were first learned. The engines have long since fallen silent, the guns gone quiet, the soldiers returned to dust. But the echoes of what they learned remain, whispered in every vehicle rolling off assembly lines worldwide, in every product designed for function over form, in every manufacturing philosophy that prizes what works over what dazzles. That day in November 1942 didn't just reveal a vehicle. It revealed a future, showed a path forward that Germany would follow from ruins to renaissance. And the whole world watches the road that lesson built, still traveling it today.